host Joe Bob Briggs on the Monster Club.
Bet you didn't expect to see Stuart Whitman in that picture, did you? Has such a classical British kind of feel to it. Stuart was one of those actors who didn't really have a trained voice, didn't really talk like a Shakespearean or anything, but he was kind of a name in the B-movie world, as we discovered a few weeks back when we showed the classic giant killer rabbit movie, Night of the Lepus. Anyhow, Vincent Price once said that he thought his career was over in the mid-50s because actors like Marlon Brando and James Dean came along, and for the very first time they could just mumble and speak in their normal everyday accents, and people loved it. And meanwhile, Vincent Price and John Carradine and their friends like John Barrymore and Errol Flynn, they'd spent years developing their voices and their stage accents. So anyway, Vincent Price made this decision that he would just stick to costume pictures from then on because he saw the future of movies, and it didn't include people who talked like he did. In fact, Vincent made a very famous film in 1953 called House of Wax, and it was kind of the beginning of his whole horror film career. It was in 3D, even though it was directed by a one-eyed man, Andrei Dutov. He couldn't even see the 3D effects. But anyhow, if you remember that movie, Vincent Price had a mute assistant, a guy who didn't have any lines. That actor's name was Charles Buczynski. He never trained his voice either, so he couldn't speak in that picture. We know him today as Charles Bronson. So, how'd I get off on that? Anyway, back to the movie. Stuart Whitman needs a creepy little village to make his movie in. So go, roll it. Do you guys remember when Vincent Price was the art spokesman for Sears? You could buy paintings for the home at Sears, and the painting would have Vincent Price's review on the back of the painting. You don't remember that? No. What's wrong with you people? You hate art? All right, nothing like a good zombie story to finish off the Monster Club. And, you know, originally they had the order of those stories reversed. This story was second, and it was followed by the Donald Pleasance Vampire Hunter story. But this makes more sense to me because when the undead walk, that's the ultimate in horror. Time for the thrilling conclusion to the 1980 box office flop that finished off several careers, including the producer and the director. I think it was all that music. You just kind of go to sleep when the musical numbers start. Anyhow, here it is, the end of the Monster Club, and we'll follow that up later tonight with the Roman Polanski classic, The Fearless Vampire Killers. Okay? Roll it. Milton Subotsky. He's the producer. I just like to say his name. Milton Subotsky. Did a lot of good stuff. The House That Dripped Blood, Tales from the Crypt, Asylum, Torture Garden. Unfortunately, his name was Milton Subotsky. Hey, Joe Bob Briggs still here, dressed up like a bloodsucker. Asked me if I'm happy about it. Well, you saw it here first. John Carradine dancing to a rock and roll band. Rockin' with the Monster Club was the name of that song. I'm surprised he didn't have his heart attack while he was doing that. Not to mention Vincent Price dancing with a fat midget. You know what I think makes that movie so cheesy, though? It's all those bad Halloween masks. I mean, it's not really monsters. It's a bunch of lame-os in Halloween masks. Not nearly as lame as this stuff. All right, we're going to follow that up with a very different movie coming up on Joe Bob's Last Call. But first, I want to remind you that next week we're starting off 1997 on Monster Vision with one of those cute little double features that the crack TNT programming department likes to come up with from time to time. We have The Fly, followed by The Swarm. We're showing the Jeff Goldblum Fly from 1986, not the Vincent Price Fly from 1958. And it's one of the greatest insect horror flicks ever made. Unfortunately, The Swarm is one of the worst insect horror flicks ever made. Remember the Towering Inferno and Airport and Earthquake, all the great disaster movies of the 70s? Well, The Swarm was supposed to be the next great disaster movie of the 70s about these killer bees taking over Texas, but instead it was just a disaster movie, if you know what I mean. Anyhow, we'll have a little fun with it next week right here after the basketball game, around about 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 Pacific. Right now, though, we're going to watch the Roman Polanski masterpiece from the 60s, The Fearless Vampire Killers, and actually a lot of people say it's a masterpiece. I'm not an enormous fan of it myself, but you decide for yourself. This thing didn't show on TV for about 20 years due to the Charles Manson murders. It just gave people a weird feeling to see Sharon Tate, who was Manson's most famous victim, being a victim in this movie. But it's one of the weirdest blood-sucking movies ever made. Roman even gave himself one of the lead roles in it, kind of a vampire horror comedy. Anyhow, I want to get the thing started because it's long. They picked the longest night to make me dress up like this. But this movie just goes on and on and on. It's kind of like a vaudeville vampire movie. You'll see. Anyhow, I'll give you the drive-in totals at the first break, and we'll have the mail girl back on a little later. There's still a whole lot more stuff coming up on Joe Bob's Last Call, starting right now. Roll it. Isn't it fun every time Charles Manson comes up for parole? You know, he goes before the parole board and says, "Yes, I am Jesus, so let me out." And then he's surprised when they don't let him out. Charlie, if you're watching, I'm not making fun of you. You know, you got to be careful. We got a lot of guys in Vacaville watch this show. They write letters to me. Talk about my hiney. Whew.